I think the big question on people's minds is, are we going to see another war, another front open up between Israel and Hezbollah?
Well, we've certainly already seen that front open up in the border zones between the two since October 7th. But yes, we are currently on a path towards escalation. That escalation is being driven by the Israelis, who see in southern Lebanon an imperative to create a buffer zone that would prevent Hezbollah or Hamas, which also now has bases in southern Lebanon, from carrying out an October 7th style assault on Israel's north. So as long as Israel believes that it can only be secure with a physical buffer zone on that frontier, we will eventually see the Israelis escalate further than what they've already done.
And this is the key here, because it seems as though Israel wants to create that buffer zone, i.e. to push back Hezbollah. I think the number that's being circulated is around 10 kilometers further north from where they are as it stands. But as we know, and anyone who has, is a purveyor of the region's history will know, that these attacks and these operations don't seem to go as planned. And the question is whether or not Israel actually has the appetite within the public, within the government, to push ahead with another war if it would mean more boots on the ground in Lebanon. What is your take?
So I think the Israelis certainly believe that they have to go into southern Lebanon in some capacity, but their preferred outcome is a diplomatic solution that goes through the United Nations or goes through some other international actor that sees Hezbollah more or less voluntarily withdraw from the border. That's Israel's preferred outcome, because that's the least risky, the least painful for it politically and diplomatically. But Hezbollah isn't going to do that. Hezbollah is not going to hand a strategic and political victory to Israel without a fight. And that's where we have this kind of geopolitical, immovable force reaching an unstoppable wall or something along those lines, where these two incompatible demands are about to collide. And it's the Israelis who can't put up with the status quo any further, which is why they're driving towards escalation. Now, in terms of, do they have the appetite? Yeah. They do at the moment. The problem for the Israeli government is they are aware that they occupied southern Lebanon from 1982 to 2000. It didn't work out for them. It's been described as Israel's Vietnam. And they are aware that if they fail to achieve their objectives, it'll be the end of their political careers, as well as potentially a strategic disaster for the Israeli military.
Yeah, and also bear in mind that 1982 was the genesis of why Hezbollah came to be. And you look at Hezbollah today with their capabilities, they're a formidable foe, the largest militia in the Middle East. So the stakes are a little bit different from 1982. Let me just ask you about the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, because a few days ago we were talking about Netanyahu's comments accusing the U.S. of withholding key military shipments. The White House came back and said that they were unaware what he was talking about. And so it seems as though the relationship right now between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is a bit fractious. And I do wonder what bearings that is going to have on Netanyahu's own decision-making, despite the fact that Amos Hochstein has been in the region trying to de-escalate.
Well, I think this is one of those situations where there's a bit of the dynamic is kind of having it flipped on its head, because Netanyahu is acting a little bit more as the dove in this situation, because his political career would very rapidly end if there's anything other than an absolute victory in southern Lebanon. Whereas the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, they're the ones that are pushing, the defense establishment are pushing for this buffer zone, because they just don't see another solution to the Hezbollah threat in the north. And so that puts the IDF somewhat at odds with President Biden and with the Pentagon, in that they're interested in regional stability, and Netanyahu, at least on this issue, is somewhat on their side. Now, overall, their relations are relatively poor, and politically it's rather frosty. But at the end of the day, at least on this particular issue, Netanyahu is dragging his feet towards a war in Lebanon, because he knows that if he gets anything other than that total victory, that's probably the end of him as prime minister.
Okay, and where do we stand on those ceasefire talks? It feels like we haven't really made a lot of progress in the last week. Should a ceasefire in Gaza come to pass, what does that mean for the border in Lebanon?
Well, as you noted, it's very unlikely that we'll see a ceasefire breakthrough at this point, given that Israel has now moved into Rafah. They're now operating more or less in the open there, and they're shifting over to a counterinsurgency campaign that looks like it's going to be open-ended. And in a counterinsurgency campaign, ceasefires are rather rare. So that looks like it'll be an open fight in Gaza for months, if not years to come. And as a result, the northern frontier will be unstable. But in that still unlikely scenario in which there is some sort of diplomatic outcome in Gaza that in some capacity or another ends that conflict, Hezbollah's political incentives to continue attacks on northern Israel will strongly diminish. And then we could see an opening of a door towards a possible diplomatic settlement in Lebanon. But we need to see a lot of things happen in Gaza before we can see that knock-on positive effect within southern Lebanon.